Arman had always believed that winning an argument meant he was right, and being right meant he was strong. It was a belief he carried like armor, something that protected him from ever feeling small or wrong. To him, relationships were not spaces for understanding but arenas where one person had to come out on top. He never said it out loud, but deep inside, he kept score. Every disagreement was a battle, every discussion a test of dominance, and every silence from the other side felt like a trophy he had earned. This mindset followed him into his relationship with Zara. In the beginning, everything felt effortless. Their conversations flowed easily, laughter came naturally, and disagreements were rare and short-lived. Zara admired how confident Arman was, how sure of himself, how unshaken by doubt. It made her feel safe at first, like she was with someone who knew what he wanted. Arman, on the other hand, admired Zara's calm nature. She didn't rush to argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't try to overpower him. She listened, really listened, and that made him feel respected. But slowly, almost invisibly, the dynamic began to change. The small disagreements that every couple faces started to appear. At first, they were harmless, choosing between two restaurants, deciding how to spend the weekend, remembering who forgot to reply to a message. Zara would express her opinion gently, explaining how she felt or why something mattered to her. Arman, however, would approach it differently. He didn't just want to express his view, he wanted to prove it was the correct one. What could have been simple conversations turned into debates. Arman would raise his voice just a little, sharpen his tone just enough, and layer his words with logic and certainty until Zara's softer voice began to fade in comparison. If she tried to explain her feelings, he would counter with facts. If she spoke from emotion, he would dismiss it as irrational. And when she paused, unsure how to respond, he would take that pause as confirmation of his victory. Each time it happened, Arman felt a quiet satisfaction. He would walk away thinking he had handled things well, that he had stood his ground, that he had maintained control. To him, compromise felt like losing a piece of himself, so he avoided it at all costs. Zara, however, experienced those moments very differently. To her, it wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about being heard. And each time her words were brushed aside, something inside her dimmed. She didn't fight harder, she didn't try to match his intensity. Instead, she softened even more, choosing silence over conflict. At first, it was just in small moments. She would let him pick the restaurant without protest, agree to plans she didn't really enjoy, and stop explaining why certain things mattered to her. Arman noticed the change, but instead of questioning it, he misinterpreted it. In his mind, this meant progress. It meant she was beginning to understand him, beginning to accept that he knew better. But the truth was far more fragile. Zara wasn't agreeing because she believed he was right, she was stepping back because she was tired. Tired of feeling like her voice didn't matter, tired of turning every conversation into a competition she never wanted to be part of. Her silence wasn't respect, it was resignation. One evening, after a long day, the tension that had been quietly building finally surfaced again. It started over something small, something that shouldn't have mattered. Zara tried, just once more, to explain her side, her voice calm but carrying a hint of exhaustion. Arman responded the way he always did, firm, confident, unyielding. He broke down her argument piece by piece until there was nothing left for her to say. The room fell, silent. Zara looked down, her hands resting still in her lap. There was no frustration in her expression, no anger, just a quiet emptiness that Arman failed to recognize. To him, it was another win, another moment where he had proven himself right. "I guess I win again," he said, a faint smirk crossing his face, expecting some reaction, maybe a sigh, maybe a reluctant smile. Zara slowly lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes held something unfamiliar, something distant and heavy, like a door quietly closing. "Yes, Arman, you always win," she said softly. Her words hung in the air, heavier than any argument they had ever had. There was no sarcasm, no bitterness, just a simple truth wrapped in quiet finality. For a brief moment, something inside Arman hesitated, as if trying to understand what her tone really meant. But his ego quickly silenced that doubt, convincing him there was nothing more to it. He leaned back, satisfied, believing once again that everything was under control. What he didn't see was that with every argument he won, he was slowly losing Zara, not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in the quiet, irreversible way that happens when someone stops feeling seen, heard, and valued. And while Arman celebrated his victories, the foundation of their relationship was quietly crumbling beneath him, one silent moment at a time. The days that followed felt unusually calm, but it wasn't the kind of calm that brings comfort, it was the kind that feels hollow, like something important is missing but no one is saying it out loud. The arguments that once filled their evenings had disappeared, replaced by a silence that stretched between Arman and Zara like an invisible wall. At first, Arman welcomed it. He told himself this was what he had wanted all along: peace, agreement, no unnecessary conflict. In his mind, this meant the relationship had finally matured. Zara moved through their shared space quietly, almost mechanically. She still did the things she always did, making tea in the morning, asking if he had eaten, reminding him about small tasks, but there was no warmth behind it anymore. Her words felt rehearsed, her presence distant. She no longer tried to start conversations or share her thoughts. When Arman spoke, she listened politely, nodding at the right moments, but rarely adding anything of her own. At first, Arman barely noticed. He was too comfortable in the absence of conflict, too used to interpreting silence as agreement. But slowly, something began to feel off. The laughter that once filled their home was gone. The small, spontaneous moments, the teasing, the playful arguments, the late-night talks, had all vanished. Everything felt flat, predictable, and strangely empty. One evening, as they sat together, Arman tried to spark a conversation. He mentioned something that would have once turned into a lively discussion. Zara simply nodded and said, "You're probably right." Her tone was neutral, almost indifferent. The words unsettled him more than any disagreement ever had. He frowned slightly. "That's it?" he asked. "No opinion." She gave a small shrug. "It doesn't matter." Those three words lingered in his mind long after the conversation ended. It doesn't matter. He couldn't explain why, but they felt heavier than they should have. Still, instead of digging deeper, instead of asking her what she really felt, he let it go. A part of him didn't want to disturb the fragile peace they had. But peace without connection isn't peace, it's distance. Days turned into weeks, and the gap between them grew wider. Arman started to feel it in the smallest ways. Zara no longer looked at him the same way. There was no curiosity in her eyes, no spark. When he came home, she didn't rush to greet him like she used to. When he spoke, she listened, but it felt like she was somewhere else entirely. The realization crept in slowly, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. He missed the arguments. Not the conflict itself, but the passion behind it, the proof that she cared enough to disagree, to express, to fight for her voice. Now, there was nothing. No resistance, no emotion, just quiet acceptance. One night, he came home earlier than usual. The house was unusually still. As he stepped inside, he noticed something different. A suitcase lay open on the bed, half filled with Zara's clothes. For a moment, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice edged with confusion. Zara didn't seem startled. She continued folding her clothes carefully, placing them into the suitcase with deliberate calm. "I'm packing," she replied softly. Arman let out a short, uneasy laugh, as if the situation was too absurd to be real. "Packing? For what?" She paused for a brief second before answering. "I'm leaving." The words hit him like a sudden drop beneath his feet. "Leaving?" he repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. "What do you mean leaving? Why?" She finally looked at him, and what he saw in her eyes wasn't anger or sadness, it was clarity. A quiet, settled decision that had already been made long before this moment. "Because there's nothing left for me here," she said. Arman shook his head, frustration rising. "That doesn't make sense. We're not even fighting anymore. Things are fine." Zara gave a faint, almost tired smile. "That's exactly the problem, Arman. We're not fighting because I stopped trying." Her words cut deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. "I used to speak," she continued, her voice steady but filled with quiet pain. "I used to explain how I felt, what mattered to me. But every time, it turned into something I had to defend, something I had to prove. It was never about understanding, it was always about who was right." Arman felt a tightening in his chest. "I was just being honest," he said weakly. "I was just right most of the time." Zara nodded slowly. "Maybe you were, but I wasn't looking for a judge, Arman. I was looking for a partner." The room felt smaller, heavier. Every word she spoke seemed to peel back a layer of truth he had refused to see. "I didn't stop arguing because I agreed with you," she went on. I stopped because I was tired of feeling like my voice didn't matter. I stopped because I realized I was losing myself trying to be heard by someone who only wanted to win. Arman's confidence, the same confidence he had relied on for so long, began to crumble. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about how to respond, how to prove his point. He was just listening, and what he heard scared him. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said quietly, his voice no longer steady. I know, Zara replied gently. That's what makes it even harder. You didn't even realize you were. She closed the suitcase and stood up, facing him fully now. I gave you so many chances to understand me, she said. Not by winning arguments, but by choosing to listen. But you were too busy protecting your ego to see what was happening. Arman felt a wave of panic rise within him. So that's it, you're just going to leave? He asked, his voice trembling now. Zara hesitated for a moment, as if weighing something inside her, then nodded. Yes, I don't want to lose you, he said, the words finally breaking through, raw and unguarded. She looked at him, her expression soft but distant. You already did, she said quietly. Not today, not in this moment. You lost me little by little, every time winning mattered more than understanding. The truth of her words settled heavily in the space between them. Arman felt it, all at once, the weight of every argument, every dismissive response, every moment he chose pride over connection. What he had seen as victories were now revealed for what they truly were, small losses that had added up to something irreversible. Zara picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. Arman didn't stop her this time. He couldn't. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove. As the door closed behind her, the silence returned, but this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was loud, overwhelming, filled with everything that had been left unsaid for far too long. Arman stood there alone, surrounded by the echoes of his own words, his own certainty, his own need to be right. And for the first time, he understood the cost of it all. He had won every argument. And yet, somehow, he had lost everything that truly mattered.